Welcome to the second podcast in the series dedicated to the victims of the Mailtrain Murders in Brisbane 1936. In this podcast, we look at Mr. Harold Speering. Please be aware that this podcast contains explicit information about murder and the injuries of the victim. Mr. Harold Edwin Speering was 37 years old and an engineer for the Queensland Postal Department when he was brutally murdered on April 2, 1936. He was a husband, brother and father of 2 young children. On hearing of his death, the Deputy Director of Post and Telegraphs, Mr. Kopit, who knew Mr. Speering personally, stated that he was a promising young engineer, popular with his colleagues, easygoing and amiable, not the type to get into brawls with others. Mr. Speering had been a government employee since 1917. On April 2nd, he was returning from Maryborough, where he had been repairing the submarine cable between Urangan and Woody Island. The colour photos on this slide are not of carriage 997 of the train 112A that came from Bundaberg April 2nd, 1936. They are here thanks to the Queensland Rail Museum, Ipswich, and are indicative of the Pullman carriage of that time. It shows how the bunks were pulled down from above when passengers wished to sleep. The black and white photo is of a newspaper representation of the carriage and indicated where the victims were found. Both Mr. Speering and Mr. Costello were beaten to death in this carriage. Conductor Boys was beaten also, but survived with injuries that would maim him for life. When they got on board, Mr. Speering and his other passengers would have settled into their berths for a quiet evening. Mr. Speering would have settled into berth 16. However, his battered body was discovered the next morning by Porter Shaw at Brisbane Central Railway Station. In his police court deposition, Shaw describes a gruesome scene whereby Spearing's body and berth were seeped with blood. One of the ambulance bearers, Donald Smith, responded to the call received at the station at 6:50 a.m. on April 2nd. In his deposition, he describes that life was extinct when he found Speering and that his pyjamas were saturated in blood and had severe injuries to his head. Dr. Edward Derrick, the director of the laboratory of the State Health Department, conducted the autopsies on both men. He reported that Mr. Speering had 13 wounds to his head and bruising to the brain. The right side middle finger was almost severed, and there were injuries on his left wrist and 2 broken fingers on his left hand. His head injuries were 2 to 3 inches long, and his skull was broken in many places. His death was due to skull and brain injuries. The doctor noted considerable force would have been used to cause these injuries. In his statement to police, Herbert Kopit, the man who killed Mr. Speering, made a chilling, emotionless description of his murder. He had already attacked the conductor and Mr. Costello before turning on Speering. Kopit stated, "There was only one man left, and I thought I would finish him off. I went to where he was asleep in his berth, and I let him have it. I hit him on the head several times until he was unconscious. He called out, 'Oh!' and kicked up a hell of a row at the station where the train stopped." Kopit stole £5 from Mr. Speering. He then changed into Mr. Spearing's coat and trousers as his were covered in blood. Kopit also stole Spearing's hat as his Panama hat did not match Mr. Spearing's clothes. He emptied one of Mr. Spearing's suitcases and packed his own clothes into it and prepared for his flight. After the gruesome discovery at Central Station, Brisbane, on Platform 6, Detective Constable Frank Biscoff interviewed the visibly shaking Victor Speering, Harold's brother, who was a clerk for the railway department. The carriage had just been moved to the next station, Roma Street's shunting yard. Detective Biscoff accompanied Victor to Roma Street, where he had the horrible task of identifying Harold Spearing's body. The Truth newspaper reported that after identifying his brother, Victor Speering drew his hand across his eyes and was heard to say, "It is awful." At Roma Street, 2 detectives, one at Mr. Spearing's head and another at his feet, lowered his body onto a covered stretcher and then into the undertaker's wagon, which transported him to the morgue. After many years of marriage, who would have predicted that Cecilia Speering would be required to appear at the police court as a witness in the committal trial of her husband's murderer? Newspapers at the time were sympathetic to Mrs. Spearing's appearance before Magistrate Mr. Boone. Dressed in black, she moved slowly toward the witness box. She was accompanied by her sister. While pressing a handkerchief to her cheek, her evidence was barely audible. Through heavy shot sobbing, she described her husband's career, that he had left home on March 29, and the contents of a suitcase. She identified the case and was visibly affected. After her brief evidence of 3 to 5 minutes, she burst into tears and almost collapsed. The Courier Mail described how difficult it was for her to sign the deposition. They wrote, "Twice her quivering fingers dropped the pen, and but for her sister and Detective Bischoff, who hurried across, she might have fallen from her chair." This part of the event was brought to life for me when reading her deposition at the Queensland State Archives. Her signature on the deposition reflected the pain she must have felt and the difficulty it was to sign that deposition, and it brought tears to my eyes. The Maitland Daily Mercury also reported Mrs. Spearing's appearance at the police court. It stated that Queensland Detective Sergeant Marnie, who arrested Kopit in Melbourne, made Kopit sit in the dock as Mrs. Spearing entered the witness box and made him stay out of sight until she left the courtroom. The Truth newspaper reports that Marnie physically held Kopit's head down to ensure that she did not have to see him. The Brisbane Courier Mail on Saturday the 4th of April 1936 reported the funeral of Mr. Harold Speering. Canon Garland led the service that was well attended by many family, friends and workmates. Pallbearers carried the coffin from his mother's home in Paddington to Toowong Cemetery. The funeral was also attended by Minister for Health and Home Affairs, Mr. Hanlon, a personal friend of the Speering family. Also, Mr. Corbett, Deputy Director of Posts and Telegraphs, who knew Speering attended. He was held in high esteem by his colleagues. Canon Garland, when delivering his service, was quoted as saying, "I am speaking for every decent member of the community in expressing abhorrence at this dastardly, cold and callous killing of a young man." He appealed to all concerned to assist the police. The effects of this tragedy would be felt for decades to come. The unimaginable trauma to Mrs. Spearing's family must have been felt even in more recent generations. Rest in peace, Harold Speering.